Okay, so here we are. We're continuing with major changes in the Jewish world as a response to the Enlightenment. And in the last video, we looked at major changes in Eastern Europe in the 18th century with the rise of the Hasidic movement and the response of the Misnagdim. But the important thing to realize at this point is that that was an issue within the traditional Jewish concept, meaning the Jews at that time still saw themselves as members of the nation of Israel that had entered a covenant with the Almighty at Sinai. Their goal had been to maintain their end of the covenant as they, made it through exile and hoping to get back to the promised land to reestablish themselves as a nation within its own borders. Now in Western Europe in the 19th century, we're going to have a much more dramatic response, in certain cases a breach of a Jew's relationship with Judaism as a whole, in other cases a major transformation in the way Jews saw themselves and their identity and function within the world. So we're going to look at three major responses. The first is conversions. Many Jews just converted out. They were so enthusiastic about this new world of opportunity, and they were so tired of the persecution and sufferings that they had endured as Jews that they just converted out. In Germany, over 30% of the Jews converted. So it was very dramatic. We have many famous converts who became very prominent in different societies. For example, Benjamin Disraeli became the prime minister in England. Then we have Karl Marx. His family converted when he was 6 years old, eventually became an atheist, but that left a distinct impression on him. Eventually, he was one who said that religion is the opium of the masses. And then we have Heinrich Heine, who was one of, if not the greatest figure of German literature in the 19th century. Now, the Jews didn't necessarily convert because they were wholeheartedly endorsing the tenets of Christianity. It wasn't that they were necessarily, excited believers. Rather, they saw conversion as a ticket into European society. There's their chance to participate fully without any baggage of being Jewish, and it's like speaking English today in society. It's just something which, many people in the world just need to do, even if that's not the mother tongue of the country they grew up in. Similarly, being Christian was the way into society and to maximize the opportunity. So clearly that's going to send a shockwave through the Jewish world. Many Jews don't want to see the next generation converting out. So we get to the second response, which is Reform Judaism. Now, one of the motivations of Reform Jews was to keep the next generation within the fold, not to see them convert out. But another motivation was to somehow rationalize a new identity within this changed world, because as the non-Jews saw themselves as part of a collective, being part of a nation that shares a land and a history and a culture together, many Jews wanted to participate and prove that they were really nationalistic to the nation they were living in. So the thinkers of Reform Judaism innovated the idea that they said that they didn't believe that the Torah, in fact, was a document given to the Jewish people by God. It was a book that was authored by multiple authors. They also removed the nationalistic notion of the Jewish people. And this makes perfect sense. As they tried to prove to the Germans or the French, wherever they lived, that they were equally French and German, so they discounted the idea of the Jewish people being a distinct nation of Israel. So there was no longer focus on returning back to the land of Israel, to rebuilding a temple of Jerusalem. Hebrew was no longer a focus. Their services, which we're going to talk about in a moment, were in the vernacular, in German or in French, because they wanted to show that they were really, as they used to say, German of the Mosaic persuasion. Their nation was the nation they're living in. They just had a religion and ethos that they had gotten from Judaism. Also, they modeled the prayer services of the Protestants. So the idea of having a choir and organ playing, they had sermons that were given in the vernacular. They in fact switched the Sabbath services from Saturdays to Sundays to be in line with their Protestant counterparts. And they also started to call their synagogues temples, because they wanted to show that they no longer believed in the rebuilding of the Temple of Jerusalem. That was no longer a focus and a dream, but rather they now had their Temple of Berlin, or their temple of Hamburg. Now, I want to point out and make clear that this is the early version or concepts behind Reform Judaism. Clearly, it's going to go through a metamorphosis as German Jews come to the States, and the reality of return to Israel, the reality of a Holocaust, shifted the concepts that were anti-Israel to pro-Israel. We'll get to that hopefully later on. But this is the early notion, at least within Western Europe in the 19th century, of Reform Judaism. The third major response to the Enlightenment, and especially in light of the conversions in Reform Judaism, was a movement called Torah with Culture. It was founded by Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch, And he was a leading rabbi in Germany. He was the main proponent of traditional Judaism, and he rallied against the Reform movement. He said, really, there is no conflict between Torah and being modern. The goal is that the Torah should be the centerpiece of one's life, a Jew's life, because the Torah is timeless. And as we move through the ages, we're meant to bring the wisdom of the Torah to the generation that we're living in. And therefore, a Jew can be totally educated, but nevertheless, the priority and the main commitment has to be to Torah tradition. He wrote many works trying to appeal to the rational or intellectual mindset of the day. One of them, explaining the commandments, is known as the Horeb, again explaining the meaning, the depth behind Torah tradition, so Jews could get a clear understanding and maintain their commitments. So those are the three major responses. But again, you have to imagine being there, that the Jews are doing so thinking that everything's going to be ultimately okay as the non-Jewish world adjusts to the Jews who are now living in their midst, but are now, I should say, now living there with a greater acceptance. But we'll see that's not going to last for too long. Okay, so let's do a little review. Okay, so we're looking at major changes in the Jewish world in the 19th century. We have conversions, over 30% of the Jews converted. We have famous converts. And again, they saw it as a ticket to European society, not so much as they were full-fledged believers. We also have the Reform movement, which began. They shifted or dramatically changed the concept of what it meant to be Jews, removing the nationalistic notions. They no longer believed the Torah was given by God. It was a man-authored document. They modeled prayer after the Protestant service, and they called their synagogue temples. So they're taking away any nationalist notions so they could prove to their German or French counterparts that they were really truly French and German, just of the Mosaic persuasion. We have the Torah with culture, founded by Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch. There's no conflict with the modern world. The Torah, nevertheless, is the centerpiece of a Jew's life, and he wrote works explaining the commandments like the Horeb.